Hey folks, in this brief tutorial we're going to talk about 1, 2, and 3 point perspectives. And we're going to do it out of a cube. You can see I have a cube here and this is an isometric view. There's a couple of real quick things I want to hit before we jump into our things to make sure we have the correct terminology. When we're talking about our isometrics or perspective views, we just want to make sure we have our things in order. So this surface here is our front view, we have our top view, and then we have our right view. This is going to matter with how we set this up in perspective just a little bit later on. And when we describe the terms that we're using here, these lines that are kind of going down towards the bottom right of the screen, those are going to be width lines. Our lines going towards the top right of the screen, those are going to be depth lines. And then lines going up and down or towards the top and bottom of the screen overall, those are going to be our height lines. Now it's just important that we have those kind of words in order here, just to make sure that when we do our next steps, it makes sense. Let's go on and start talking about 1 point perspective, and then we'll move up through the points as we go. Now, I have 4 rules that I generally follow with a 1 point perspective, and we're also going to go through a couple of guidelines that will help you out. We'll talk about the steps, and then we'll go through and draw them and show you how they look in action. So this is for 1 point, and I'm just going to abbreviate point by 1 point, or PT. So step 1 is going to be draw the horizon line, which I'm going to say is HL, or horizon line, and our vanishing point, so VP for vanishing point. And we're going to do that in just a moment. The next one that we're going to do is go and draw on our front view, or FV. From there, we need to connect the corners to the vanishing point. And then finally, our fourth and final thing is that we're going to draw our depth lines and connect them. Now with these 4 steps, you can really solve any 1 point perspective in the engineering sense, but we also have one more other thing that we need to talk about here. The general idea here that we need to talk about is that we're going to go through and we need to make sure that vertical lines, they're always going to stay vertical. So if we have a vertical line on the front, it's going to exist in the back. They're going to be parallel with each other. So all the vertical lines will stay parallel with each other. So vertical lines are going to stay vertical. And the same thing goes with horizontal lines. Horizontal lines will stay horizontal. No matter what, they will stay parallel with each other. And that will make more sense as we go through and actually create this. So let's jump out here and zoom a little bit out so we can see our rules, but we're also going to be able to go through and draw these as they show up. I'm going to be using a couple different colors here. Red lines are going to represent vanishing points and horizon lines. Blue lines are going to be construction lines. They're going to be nice and light, that are easy to erase if you're doing it with pencil. And then black lines will be visible lines. And we'll go through and talk about these here. I'm using a triangle to create these lines, just as a heads up if you're trying to follow along at home. And I have my pencil here as well. So step 1 is to draw on our horizon line. So I'm just going to go in and draw a horizon line from left to right. And then somewhere on there, I'm going to put a vanishing point. For these examples, I'm going to put it on to the top right of that line, but it's really up to you. And the vanishing point is pretty simple. Just draw a little dot somewhere on there, and we're good to go. That whole thing, that's step 1. Now we're going to go in and start talking about step 2. Step 2 is to draw the front view. And the front view of a cube, which is the shape that we're going to go with here, is pretty simply just a square. So I'm going to draw a square out here, and then we'll go through and talk about the next steps once we have that established. But let's go in and quickly draw a square again. I'm using some drawing tools here, so it might not be the most perfect, but that's okay for this example. If you're doing this anywhere else, try to get a little better than what I'm doing here, but you'll get the idea here. And that's our front view. So that's going to be step 2. All right, so now we're going to move on to step 3, and this is to connect the corners. Essentially, when we look here, we have these corners on our rectangle, or if you take a look, we have some corners here on our square. So there's 4 of them that we have, especially if I would have drawn this a little bit better. But the idea here is that we're going to take these corners and bring them back to the vanishing point. The only one I'm not going to focus on is this one here, because if I were to bring that back, it would be inside of the rest of it. And I'm not going to worry about that for these drawings. Again, I'm going to be using blue as construction lines, and basically I'm just taking each corner and lining it up with my vanishing point and drawing a line going there to each one. All right, so we have our lines there, and you can see that it goes back and creates a three-dimensional shape. We have our front view, we have a top, and we have a right, but they don't have any depth on there. So we're going to move on to step 4 in just a moment, but let's go through and label step 3. So step 3 is in blue there. And our final steps here is we're going to draw some visible lines that are going to represent the back of the object, or the back edge of it. So I'm going to start off by drawing a vertical line somewhere on that right view, which is this triangle in this area here. This is our right view. We just need to go through and draw it on somewhere. It doesn't really matter where, it just needs to exist somewhere. Again, with perspectives, you can kind of go through and make them how you want. It's kind of a little bit up to you because you get to see what's going on. But vertical lines stay vertical. So I'm keeping the vertical line here that exists right here. It's also going to stay vertical here. And then this front edge is going to be horizontal, so it needs to stay horizontal in the back. And we're just draw on a horizontal line real fast to connect those corners together. And then we have step number 4 over and complete it with, and we're good to go there. So that is there. That's step 4. The last thing we need to do, and this isn't a given step, but it's for all of them, is go in and darken in your visible lines. So all I'm going to do is take my straight edge and just go and retrace these construction lines to be nice and dark so that they're easy to tell that they're supposed to be the visible items and everything else is construction. And we get the general idea of what we're doing there. If I wanted to, I could go through and erase those blue lines and see it even better. But that's the steps here for a 1-point perspective drawing. Let's jump into 2-point. In this one, we're going to go through and talk about 2-point perspective. And as we did before, we're going to start off with some rules and a couple of guidelines. There's an extra point on here because we went from 1 to 2, so we have an extra step. This is going to be a total of 5 steps, but we only have one guideline that we really need to follow for this. So let's go in and talk about it and figure out what we're doing here. So step 1 is going to be drawing your horizon line and 2 vanishing points. There's going to be one on the left and one on the right of that horizon line. Step 2 is going to be draw a vertical line for the total height. Step 3 is going to be to connect the top and bottom of that vertical line to each vanishing point. Step number 4 is going to be to draw a vertical line in each of the triangles you've created, and that will make a whole lot more sense once we do it. And then we have one more step here, and that's to take the corners, and that'll make more sense here in a second. But essentially what we're doing is that initial vertical line is going to kind of serve as our center point where we have things move around. So any corners that are on the right of that initial line are going to go to the left vanishing point. And anything that's on the left of that vertical line is going to go to the right vanishing point. Again, that will make a whole lot more sense here in just a second. And our only other guideline that we have is vertical lines are going to stay vertical. And again, when we get into the drawing, this will make a whole lot more sense. But let's zoom out a little bit here. We have our rules on the side, and we can go in and start drawing. Again, you're going to use the same color combination. Red is going to be for vanishing points and horizon lines. Blue will be construction, and black will be actual visible lines that we have here. So to start off with, we're just going to quickly go in and draw our horizon line going across there like so. And I'm going to put a vanishing point on the left and a vanishing point on the right. And that's all step one. The next step that we're going to do is draw a vertical line for the total height. Depending on your part, this may be a construction line or it could be a visible line. If the front right corner of the object is the total height or the tallest height on there, you're going to draw a visible line. If it's not, you'll draw a construction line. In this example, because we're doing a cube, it's the same height all the way around, so we will be drawing a vertical line that is visible. But just know that if you have something different there, it may be a different solution. And I'm just going to draw that one in there like so, and we have it set. So that vertical line there is important. It's going to matter a whole bunch, and that's step 2. After that, we're going to go through and connect the top and bottom of that vertical line to each vanishing point. This is kind of the part that people can get messed up on. It's not too hard. You just need to make sure you do this in this order and make sure you keep it separate from 3-point, which we'll talk about in our next part here. But again, I'm going from the right vanishing point, just connecting lines to each of those. And then we're just going to do the exact same thing for the right hand or the left hand side here. Just connect them to the top and bottom with construction lines. So that's going to be step number 3. All right. The next thing that we're going to do is step 4, where we're going to be drawing our vertical lines inside of each triangle. And what I mean by that is we have a triangle here, which represents our front view. It represents the total width of what's going on. And then we have this triangle here on the right, which is our right view. And essentially what we're going to be doing is we're going to establish what our front view is by drawing a vertical line in here, and our right view by drawing that vertical line. Again, we are working with a cube, so we kind of know what's kind of look like here, but we're just going to be able to drop a visible vertical line here on that left triangle. And once we have that, we can see our front view, and we're going to do the same thing on the right triangle, and that's going to represent our right view. So that's going to be step number 4. And I apologize for arrows going all over the place, but it's kind of necessary for what we're doing. And then the last thing we need to do is connect our lines here on step 5. It says corners. So if we take a look here, there's a corner where we have an intersection here and another one here. I'm not going to worry about these bottom ones, even though they exist. For what we're doing, it doesn't matter. When you get a little more complicated with this, it will. But this corner here and this corner here, we're basing all of this off of this initial vertical line. So if we have something to the left of that initial line, it's going to go out towards the right vanishing point. If we have something on the right of that initial vertical line, it's going to go over to the left vanishing point. And what this is going to basically do is it's going to give us our top view. So we're just going to very simply, I'm on the left right now, so I'm going to eventually go over to the right vanishing point, like so. And then the one that's on the right is going to go back to the left vanishing point. And you can see very quickly here, we have a closed-in area here that represents the top. So let's just go and label that. This is going to be step 5. And then, even though it's not written, we need to go through and close all of these in. So we would make sure that all of these were visible lines to complete the part. Obviously, you'd want to make sure you use a straight edge to do this. I'm just very quickly going through and getting that. But that's a 2-point perspective of the cube based on this particular view. Again, they can look different and they will look different depending on where your vanishing points are and where your vertical line is. Let's move over to a 3-point perspective. We've hit the big daddy of them all, a 3-point perspective. We're adding another point, so that means we're adding another rule. We have a total of 6 rules with this, and we're back to 3 guidelines, but they're not really real guidelines like they were before. Because on other ones, we had hard and fast rules where vertical lines stayed vertical or horizontal lines stayed horizontal. That will not be the case here. So our first step, luckily, is just to repeat step 1 from the 2-point. And as a reminder, that is to draw in a horizon line and a vanishing point on the left and right of that horizon line. Step 2 is to go through and draw a vanishing point that is below and between the other two vanishing points. That will make a whole lot more sense here in just a little bit, but it's important to know that it can exist above, but for all the examples here, everything is below the horizon line and everything kind of exists there. I just like to be consistent when I'm teaching this. Step 3 here is to go through and put a dot between all 3 of the vanishing points. Not too big of a deal. We're just going to slide on up a little bit here and move on to step 4, which is going to connect the vanishing points to the dot. Step number 5 is probably the one that's going to be the hardest. The basic setup of this is not too bad. Most of my students and people I've taught this to can nail the first 5 steps without any issue, or the first 4 steps without any issue. Step 5 is where we run into problems. What we're going to do is we're going to connect the left and right vanishing point to somewhere on the line coming up from the bottom one. I usually like to say halfway because it just makes it easier, but if you don't do this step or you mess it up, you will not have a 3-point drawing. So we're going to explore why that happens and what you can do to solve for it, but let's get our step 5 down here first. And then our last rule here that we need to follow is to repeat step number 5 from the 2-point. And that will make a whole bunch more sense once you see it. Now we have a couple other things we need to go with. These are guidelines. They're hard and fast rules that will allow you to kind of make sure you're successful with this. And it deals with our dimensions, so width, height, and depth. If we have anything that deals with width, that's always going to be going to the left vanishing point. Anything that deals with height, that is always going to be going to the bottom vanishing point. And then finally, anything that deals with depth will always be going towards the right vanishing point. All right, so we have our steps, we have our guidelines. Let's zoom on out here. We'll make sure we can see them a little bit. And then we'll go through and repeat these steps and get them set. I promise this is not as bad as it looks, but let's go through and get the initial parts of this set up and ready to go. So we're repeating step 1 from our 2-point, which is to draw in a horizon line and then a vanishing point on each side. So very quickly, just drawing that in there. Going to draw on a vanishing point on the left and another one on the right. And that's all part of step 1. All right, step number 2 is to draw a third vanishing point that is below and between the other 2. So we have these guys here. We want to draw that somewhere in this area. We don't want to put it all the way off to the side or all the way over here. I want to draw it somewhere in there between and below. I'm going to put mine down around this area just for today's example. It doesn't really matter as long as you follow that rule, it will work. But for simplicity, I'm going to try to center it and put it well below. So that's going to be step number 2. Okay, step 3 is going to be a little different here. We're going to be putting a dot somewhere in between this area. So you can see this kind of makes a triangle. We want to put a dot somewhere in here. A lot of people when they're learning this will have the inclination to put it directly above. I'm going to caution against that. Put it just to the left or just to the right. It will help you not have one of the problems that comes up in step 5. You don't have to follow that, and I'll explain it when we get to step 5. But I'm just going to put a dot somewhere just a little bit to the left there, or to the right of that initial spot. And that's going to be step number 3. And then our next step, step 4, is to connect all of our vanishing points to that dot. So very quickly, we're just going to draw some construction lines in there to make sure they all get set to that dot, like so. And essentially what we're doing is we're establishing some of our axis areas here that we can work with, basically our X, Y, and Z in the 3D sense. So those are going to be all part of step numbers 3 and 4. All right, now we're on to the biggest part, the biggest problem that people have, step 5, where we're connecting our left and right vanishing points to somewhere on this line coming up from the bottom one. The reason why I caution against having this be straight up and down is because your tendency is to then just connect these down to the bottom vanishing point. But that's not what we're doing here. For a 3-point perspective, if we connect something directly to that bottom vanishing point that we have, we're completely eliminating it. It now becomes a 2-point perspective. We have to make sure we're somewhere on this line, because all of our height lines, remember, generate from that point. If we have our total width or total depth going directly to that bottom point, we don't have any height lines that we can put in anywhere that generate from that spot. So it gets a little funky. So what we're going to do is we're going to again use some construction lines, and we're going to go roughly about halfway down. You can play with this as you wish. It's not super essential as long as you're not going to that bottom vanishing point. So I'm just putting those in there like so. Oof, that was an ugly line. But that's steps 3, 4, and now 5 that we have on there. Now, looking at our guidelines here on the bottom, we have our 3 basic guidelines that we have. We have our width is left to right, or goes to the left vantage point. Our height comes from the bottom vantage point, and our depth is the right. We have our total area here. This is our front view. This is going to be our right view, but we don't have the top. So essentially where we before took vertical lines and brought them down, we're just bringing those height lines from our bottom vanishing point upwards. This part's really not too bad a deal. Just connect from the bottom vanishing point, and you're going to bring lines somewhere up over there. And we're going to do the same thing on the right view. Something like that. Now we can see that we have our front view established here. We have our right view established here. And we just need to repeat step number 5 from 2 point, where we cross over. Again, that initial vertical line does matter, that line going up towards the top. So we're just going to very quickly put that in there, draw a line going across, and we will do the exact same thing here on our left vanishing point, bringing it across. And now we have our steps established. So that's going to be step number 6. And all we'd have to do, as with any of these, is darken in our lines that we have here. Oof, let me back that up. That's super ugly. I apologize. But we'll go through, darken those in. And we get a 3-point perspective of our thing there. So that's 1, 2, and 3-point perspectives done somewhat nicely on there with the steps that you need to complete them. Again, this is just for a cube. If you're going through and doing a more complicated shape or a different shape or something that's totally different overall, these steps will completely work, because if you're looking at a cube or a rectangle, think of it as the maximum size that something will take up, and then you can start drawing on your front view, your top view, your right view, and bringing lines back. In a future video, I'll talk about how to do that, and I do have some already on the channel that you'll see at the end of this that already talk about some of these, but more in a technical sense, not as kind of drawing on the iPad here. So please let me know if you have any questions. Hopefully this helped, and I'll talk to you in a future video.